Hey guys, sorry, the old video, or the other video, WWF and some WCW in review part one is now in the archives. They cut off. I was just gonna say and just gonna end it by saying that, like I said, Monday Night Raw was slowly becoming the A show. They were edging out superstars that already gotten rid of Wrestling Challenge. Monday Night Raw was starting to become the centerpiece, and the proof of that was an amazing match that they had in July of 1994 between the 1-2-3 Kid and Bret Hart. Bret Hart was a fighting champion. He took on every opponent: Jeff Jarrett, Yokozuna, Diesel. Obviously, we mentioned some of his title defenses in the other video. But one of the people that he took on was 1-2-3 Kid. And 1-2-3 Kid, this match between 1-2-3 Kid was and Bret Hart was an amazing babyface match. Like, he had you on the edge of your seat thinking 1-2-3 Kid could almost win the WWF Championship. Like I often said, Sean Waltman's story, Sean Waltman, the real name of the guy that portrayed 1-2-3 Kid, Six, X Pac, whatever you want to call him, his story could be told through the prism of Monday Night Wrestling. I mean, not only did he debut on a main stage on Monday Night Raw as the Lightning Kid, and then defeating Razor Ramon in that upset, which propelled him to superstardom, but he also had this match with Bret in '94, a match so good that Macho Man and Jim Ross both had to give a standing ovation. That's how good this match was. And this was the standout match, in my opinion, in 1994. But what's happening in the other channel in 1994? Hogan comes. Of course, he defeats Ric Flair. He defeats him again at Clash of Champions. Uh, Even though he was injured with his knee, a mysterious masked man hit Hulk Hogan in his knee. You're thinking Hogan won't be able to wrestle in the main event. He does. He defeats uh, Ric Flair. This was actually on my birthday in 1994, August 26, 1994. The rematch. I wanted Flair to win, but anyway, Hogan wins again. That sets up their October Halloween Havoc cage match, which, like I said, Muhammad Ali is in attendance. Mr. T is in attendance. It's a funny match. Sherry and Jimmy Hart, both the managers of these guys, climbing the cage. But at the end of it, Hogan's celebrating, and the mysterious masked man comes out, and he unmasks them. And it's who is it? It's Brother Brutai, a.k.a. Brutus the Barber Beefcake. They couldn't use Brutus the Barber Beefcake, obviously, because WWF copyright reasons. So Brother Brutai. Now, if that's not the most anticlimactic shit that you've ever encountered, I don't know what is. Supposedly, and this would have made a lot more sense, supposedly it was supposed to be Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, and that would have made perfect sense because given his history with Flair. You know, he basically managed Flair in the WWF, and he had history with Hogan. You know, going back to the Royal Rumble, 1990, when Hogan won the Royal Rumble. So it would have made perfect sense. It was him, but they couldn't get him. You know what I mean? They couldn't get him, so they went with Brother Brutai. And then there was two masked men, and they found out months later that the second masked man was Arn Anderson. You know, but this masked man was Brother Brutai, and he went from being Brother Brutai to being the Butcher. He hooked up with Kevin Sullivan and the debuting John Tenta. As I said, Tenta had the sumo match with Yokozuna on Raw, and then after that, he went to WCW, and he's in the Three Faces of Fear with Kevin Sullivan. But who else shows up in the WWF in the lead up to Starrcade 1994, which is going to be the Butcher, Ed Leslie versus Hulk Hogan. Also, The undercard is going to be Sting versus Avalanche, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who is the United States champion, who won the United States Championship in a record quick speed against stunning Steve Austin. So obviously, with Steve Austin losing, with Cactus Jack losing a loser leaves town match to his ex-partner Kevin Sullivan at Fall Brawl, with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat retiring, with Flair retiring, all the Vader losing a lot of matches against uh, the Boss, who he couldn't use the Boss gimmick anymore. So the kayfabe made it that WCW Commissioner Nick Bockwinkel banned the use of a nightstick, but it was really a legal issue. WWF was threatening to sue because he was using a gimmick too close to the Big Boss Man. So the Guardian Angels, the organization headed up by Curtis Sweela, that was founded in February of 1979, basically not a vigilante organization, but kind of like a protection organization, comes out on WCW Saturday night, offers Ray Taylor a chance to go from being a cop to go to being a guardian angel. Actual guardian angel shows up, puts the red jacket, and signature red jacket and red beret on Ray. He becomes the guardian angel. So at Fall Brawl '94, he has a three-way qualifying, kind of like a three-way qualifying match with Vader against, the winner will take on Jim Duggan at Starrcade. Vader wins, and he takes on Jim Duggan at Starrcade. So all of Hogan's friends are basically taking over all of WCW, basically. All the former good guys that we love from WCW, like Cactus Jack, like Steve Austin, like Ricky Steamboat, they're all being aged out some sort of way, and it's the new version of the old WCW show. Brutus Beefcake. And with that said, who else comes over? The Macho Man Randy Savage. On an episode of WCW Saturday Night, the Macho Man Randy Savage shows up, and he says, "I'm going to either slap Hulk Hogan in the face or I'm going to shake his hand, brother. Freak out, freak out, freak out. Randy Savage, and I'm here to take it to the limit, yeah." And that blew me away, but I knew that Randy Savage was going from WWF because it's something that Vince never did. He didn't do this for Hogan. He didn't do this for Piper or anybody else that left the company, would leave the company subsequently, even Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. He didn't do this for really anybody. He announced that Randy Savage was no longer with the company. That Randy Savage would no longer be his commentary partner on Raw. Randy Savage, keep in mind, had started out on Raw. That Randy Savage was gone. And he looked sad doing it. And I thought, well, we never see Randy Savage again in wrestling. Boom, I was wrong. He's set up to appear in Nashville at Starrcade in 1994. Now, the intrigue around Starrcade 1994 was not, for me, was not the WCW Championship match, but was whether Savage was going to align himself with the Faces of Fear and Kevin Sullivan, who had become Hogan's nemesis, but just only because his brother, the former Equalizer, aka Evad, basically an autistic wrestler, an old Eugene before Eugene, basically a special needs wrestler who was a huge Hulkamaniac. Kevin Sullivan, who was his big brother. The joke on him because Kevin is shorter than the guy that played Dave Sullivan. This dyslexic wrestler who couldn't even spell his own name right. He becomes a Hulkamaniac. He starts to dress in red and yellow tights. Becomes the biggest Hogan stand that there is. Kevin Sullivan can't stand it, so he embarks on a mission to destroy Hulkamania by turning Hogan's best friend against him. So my whole thing is, will he get Randy Savage too? Well, he doesn't. Randy Savage comes out and he shakes Hogan's hand. They beat up the three Faces of Fear together, and that's the end of Starrcade 1994. But in a backstage segment similar to the Borg and Luger thing, the new number one contender, the new United States champion who beats Duggan decisively, Vader comes out. And this is what fans have been waiting for since Hogan came to the WWF. They've been waiting for him to face Vader because here is somebody that he's never faced. He never faced Flair on pay-per-view, but he did face Flair before in house shows when they were in the WWF. He's faced Rick Rude, who was a main eventer in WCW at that time, but he's never faced Flair. Vader. Vader is a guy he's never faced. Vader and him have never come face to face, and he's the typical wrestler that Hogan would face. A big guy wrestler. So their match is set for Super Brawl 5, and that's how we go into 1995 in WCW with Hogan on top, and we go into 1995 in the WWF with Diesel on top. So you got Diesel and Hulk Hogan as the respective champions of both companies, and you have a completely different show on WCW. Think of where we started. Vader and Ric Flair, two homegrown WCW stars as the main event. You got Steve Austin, Rick Rude, and Paul Orndorff. Basically, with the exception of Paul Orndorff and Rick Rude, but Rick Rude as a main eventer, in my opinion, was more synonymous with WCW. He did better in WCW as U.S. champion, as NWA International champion, than he ever did in the World Wrestling Federation when he was just Intercontinental champion, and he had Bobby Heenan as a manager. He did better in WCW, in my opinion. He came into his own in WCW when he went there. So he was basically synonymous with WCW. And, of course, so was Steve Austin, so was Pillman, and so was Dustin Rhodes, because these guys had never been to the World Wrestling Federation yet. So, and all throughout the year, the storyline that was dominating WCW was Dustin Rhodes versus Colonel Parker Stud Stable, Terry Funk, Bunkhouse Buck, and Arn Anderson. Later on, he brought his father. Brought his father into the fray in a tag team match at Clash of Champions. He brought the Nasty Boys, who turned babyface, team with them at the War Games. War Games 94 was the cutoff one because Hogan wasn't there. He was there to make the match at Halloween Havoc, but he wasn't on the card. And that was the last non-Hogan main event where we would ever see. Hogan would come to dominate WCW. And if he wasn't dominating, his friends really were. So 94, Full Brawl 94 was really the cutoff point. As we head into 1995, that's where we're at. The Intercontinental Championship is held by Razor Ramon. We're going to Royal Rumble to challenge Jeff Jarrett for it. Jeff Jarrett has a new manager that he'll be premiering. Is Road Dogg, Brian James Armstrong, Bob Armstrong's son, will come over to the WWF from Smoky Mountain Wrestling, where his father was the commissioner. Smoky Mountain is doing pretty well in 1994. As Jim Cornette said, in 1994, Smoky Mountain was the only wrestling organization to grow. WWF was doing bad business. WCW was starting to inch up. ECW wasn't even on people's radar in 1994. It wasn't until 1995 that they really have their best year, as the manager from WWF, Johnny Polo, would switch and go to ECW and become Raven. The Sandman would become a huge star. And 1995 was basically their year. But in 1994, they really weren't doing much of anything. Smoky Mountain was the focus. But Brian James Armstrong goes to the WWF, and he's the manager. He becomes the manager / roadie of Double J, and they're really giving Double J a huge push in 1995. We're going to win the Intercontinental Championship from Razor Ramon. The Tag Team Championships, like I said, were held up in a tournament. And after 2 years of being with the company, the Smoking Guns finally defeat uh, Bob Holly and the 123 Kid on the Raw after the Royal Rumble 1995, and they become the champions for the first time. So we're starting to hit into that mid 90s mix. Mid 90s is a mixed bag. You did have the next year. I cannot wait to do 1995 because 1995 is the year when you have all the goofy gimmicks with Diesel as the champion. They say Diesel was the worst drawing WWF champion in history, and that's probably true, but it wasn't because of anything he did. He had some horrible title defenses, believe me. SummerSlam 1995 against Mabel, two matches against Sid back to back, and in your house pay per views. One was a lumberjack match. He had one with the British Bulldog who turns heel in '95. We'll talk about it when we do a 1995 year in review. But anyway, guys, thanks for listening. This is your boy Jay Reaction. Peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I love doing these, taking a stroll down memory lane, remembering when wrestling used to be magical. You know what I mean? When it used to be so good, I couldn't wait to watch it. Now I dread watching Monday Night Raw. I dread watching SmackDown. People talk about, oh, okay, what if next year, this is off topic, but what if next year, uh, WWF and WWE, now they call it, since 2002, hell, September 12th, in like 2 days, the WWE could go from being called the WWE to being called TKO. Well, TKO, WWE, whatever you want to call it, WWF, WWF, Capital Wrestling Corporation, you know, Titan Sports. They've gone by many names. Capital Championship Wrestling, many names. The New York Territory, whatever. This company. People talk about. People talk about. What if now, when they go off Peacock next year, what if now TKO makes their pay-per-views super expensive, where you have to subscribe to a streaming service for the WWE Network, but you have to pay big money for the pay-per-views. I'm like, I don't care anyway because I don't watch their pay-per-views. I stopped watching. Well, first of all, this is the difference between my fandom in 1994 and 1995 and every other year of my fandom. Every other year, 1994, 1995, like I said in the first video, by virtue of the hot box, I got to watch every single pay-per-view. WWF and WCW. ECW wasn't on pay-per-view. I never got to watch that. But they didn't start watching until they came on TNN in '99. Couldn't really watch it then for a different reason. But people say, well, what are you going to do then, Jay, if, TKO, WWE, whatever, starts to charge full price for their pay-per-views and do like the UFC does? What are you going to, aren't you going to be upset? No, not really, because it's not as good as it used to be. I'll be kind of upset because I won't get to see WrestleMania. But whatever, even WrestleMania, I wasn't excited for WrestleMania 30, as excited for WrestleMania 39 this past year as I was for WrestleMania 10. I've grown up with WrestleMania. I'm the same age as WrestleMania. WrestleMania is 39. WrestleMania 39, WrestleMania 10. I was at 10 years old. I was super excited. People talk about this being the dark period of WWE, and it kind of was by comparison to the 80s or by comparison to the Attitude Era that they would experience later. But this to me was my golden age. This to me was the height of my fandom. I was I was obsessed with the World Wrestling Federation at this time. You know, you know what I'm saying? And WCW, but the World Wrestling Federation more so because I'm a New Yorker. I got to go to WWF shows. I got to see WWF live. I got to meet WWF wrestlers. I first watched the WWF on syndicated broadcasting before I had cable. The WWF is from my hometown. The WWF is the WWE, WWF, whatever, TKO. Vince McMahon's wrestling. It's my wrestling. It's my territory. You know, I watch other shit later because of cable or because of magazines or because of whatever, tapes, DVDs, clips here on YouTube. But nothing compares to the World Wrestling Federation at this time in my mind. And because they were becoming smaller, because of their less of their business, they were coming to New York a lot more. And it felt closer to New York, closer to its roots than it ever had been or ever will be again in the mid 90s. Wrestlers would go on New York talk shows and go on these New York talk shows, New York public talk shows. And they would go make public appearances in places all around New York. And they felt closer to home than they ever had been in my lifetime. I wasn't around for the territory era. I wasn't around to know what they were like when they were just a territory with Bruno or San Martino or Pedro. And of course, the 80s, they felt huge because they were a national promotion. And after that, they felt big and stuff. Nowadays, they feel huge. Look, they're doing a show today in India. You know what I'm saying? So they felt more localized in 1994 than they did ever any other period in the local expansion. So people say, well, what are you going to do if they raise their pay-per-view price? I just won't watch them like I don't watch them now. I watch WrestleMania and that's it. But even WrestleMania, it's a lot bigger now. You know what I mean? They do stadiums. They'll never come back to Madison Square Garden, which they should. You know what I mean? The last WrestleMania I went to, WrestleMania 29, I had to take the Greyhound all the way to Jersey. I think I want to take Greyhound all the way to Jersey. I would have loved to have gone to WrestleMania in Madison Square Garden like I did for 10 or 20. But it didn't happen because they got outgrowing that. I get that. But in my opinion, when they were small, when they were struggling, when they were having their hard times, that's when they felt closest to the fans here in New York City. 1994 to 1997. That's when they felt at home. New York City is the home of the World Wrestling Federation. If they ever build a Hall of Fame and it's anywhere but New York City, I'm going to be really pissed because, come on, you're the New York territory. You belong to New York. You're just as much WWF slash WWE slash TKO, whatever. I don't know if I'll ever get used to calling it TKO, but we'll see after the 12th. But is as much a part of the New York sports culture as the Rangers are, as the Knicks are, as the Mets are, the Yankees are. It's part of our New York City cultural heritage. So no matter how big you get, you're New York. You're always going to be when the wrestlers talk about you. Let's see the old school wrestlers when they talk about the WWF. Where do they always say they go? Do they say they go to Stamford, Connecticut? No, obviously that's where the headquarters are, right? WWE HQ. But they always say they go to New York. You know what I'm saying? Never before in national expansion years did they ever feel closer to the New York. You could watch TV and get WWF results on the news at that time, in the paper at that time. In fact, one of the theories why Lex Luger didn't win the championship was because the night before WrestleMania, he went around bragging, and it was printed in the in the Daily News that he was going to win the belt. So Vince changed the finish. That would never happen now. You know, that would never happen now. WWE at this time felt closer to their roots than they ever felt. WCW was doing big things too, but WCW's in Atlanta. Them- they're never gonna feel down south. They're never gonna feel as close to me as the World Wrestling Federation, as the WWE, as this a part of New York, as I am a New Yorker, and, I, and it is my town. It's my hometown. You know. So anyway, uh, that was 1994 in WWE and some WCW. The stars of 1994 were One Two Three Kid, Owen Hart, and Bret Hart. Um, Peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see my next videos coming out. Love you guys. Yeah, I did change my battery, you guys. But yeah, that's basically it. This was the New Yorkest of the New York era. Most of the roads were done in some part of upstate New York. WrestleMania was done in the Garden, and '95 would be kind of the same. '95 would be kind of the same thing. It was always on WPLJ because Todd Pettengill was in the WWE. They were always on the news. They were always local. And I know it can never be the way it was because it can never be that good again. And it became better. Don't get me wrong. '97 is my favorite year. And when we get to 1997, man, I'm gonna have so much fun doing 1997 year in review, and that is gonna be a co WWF and WCW because I was so into WCW at that point. 1997, I didn't even watch WrestleMania. WrestleMania 13 from the Chicago Rosemont Horizon. Sid and Undertaker is the main event. When Undertaker goes back to the Grey Gloves, when he wins the title against Sid for the second time. I didn't even watch that. I watched uncensored that year because after I no longer had the hot box, I had to make a choice between WCW and WWF pay per views, and most of the time I would go with WWF because even during the 83-week run that WCW was whooping Vince McMahon's ass, they still had better pay per views. Mind Games was still a better pay per view than Halloween Havoc '96. with a balding Macho Man and a balding Hulk Hogan. But anyway, uh, we're not in '96. We're not in '97. We still have 1995 to go. And that's a pretty fun year too, 1995, because that's the worst year in professional wrestling history. Both companies were the shits. Both companies uh, 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 produced some of the worst professional wrestling that you've ever seen in 1995. And even I was still a huge fan, though. I was still, uh, into everything. But man, looking back, 1995 had to be. And that's going to be fun looking back at that because here, you see how I said 5 pay-per-views a month in '94? Well, 1995, that all changes, brother. 1995, they introduced the In Your House concept, which is a pay-per-view each month. So, say WWF didn't have it, they never had a pay-per-view in July. Now they have one. They never had a pay-per-view in April. Now they have one. They never had a pay-per-view in February. Now they have one. They never had one in October. Now they have one. They never had a pay-per-view in November. Now they have one. The one in December. And some of these early in your houses are some of the worst fucking atrocious shit. Like I said, Diesel and Sid twice that you've ever seen. I watched them. I was able to watch them because I still had the hot box at that point. But and I had to go back and watch the network too because part of 1995 I stopped watching. You know what I mean? Like after Halloween Havoc '95, I I gave up. Their concept for Starcade, Japan versus the United States, terrible concept. Bobby Heenan leading a Japanese invasion. I gave up on WCW at that point. WWF, that British Bulldog Diesel match ran me off. But that's still to come. 1995 for this is 1994, and I still was all in. I still enjoyed wrestling. It took 1996 and the greatness that was 1996 to pull me back in. You know what I mean? And then I was a fan. 97, man, 97. I was again at my peak fandom in 97. 98 too. But Austin's ascension to the throne in 1997, Bret Hart's heel turn in 97, the NWO was on fire in 97, coming into their own. That's going to be a fun year. 98 too. 98's the year that most fans love. All of Stone Cold Steve Austin's antics, the height of the Monday Night Wars, both companies were on fire. Goldberg was ascending to the throne. 99 is a good year too. 2000, I started to drop off again. I got older. I was like 15, 16, started dating girls. Started doing other things with my life, having other interests. 2001, I started to pay attention again because I thought they were going to do something. When we get to 2001, we'll talk about it. I thought they were going to do something big with the invasion angle. They didn't. And then after 2001, I dropped off again. And I kept watching because obviously I went to WrestleMania 20. Can't wait to talk about 2004. But I dropped off again in 2006 and came back in 2008 because I heard 50 Cent was going to accompany Mayweather. I was a huge 50 Cent fan at that time. 50 Cent was on fire in the 2000s. I heard 50 Cent was going to do Mayweather's entrance against Big Show. So I watched WrestleMania 24. I was 24 years old at that time. And that's when I got back in. And I've been in kind of my version of in ever since, 20, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, and now 40. But we'll talk about each year. But again, it becomes harder and harder to do. This is the last year that it's going to be kind of easy because this is the last year, 1994, that they have 5 pay-per-views. After this, it becomes a pay-per-view every month. And I'm not going to have as vivid memories of each pay. Well, I could watch them all on the network. I'll do that for you guys. But I'm saying I'm not going to have as vivid memories of specific pay-per-views in even in 96 and 97 and 98 and 99 because I didn't watch every single pay-per-view because I didn't have the legal cable no more. I could only watch one every once in a while. You know what I mean? But I watched every Raw and I watched every Nitro. But at this point in 1994, I was so in. I was watching every slam. I was rest. I was watching it just like Common was. Uh, he used to love her. He used to love hearing every rhyme. Well, that's how I was with every slam. If I ever do music, my peak music years were like 96 to like 90 to 2004 or 5. But yeah, uh, it was interesting to take a trip down memory lane with you guys. I love talking old school wrestling. I love talking old school anything in general. But when it comes to old school wrestling and old school music, because I was so immersed in these things, it brings a smile on my face to think of these years uh, when I was 10, 11 years old watching professional wrestling. Peace. Love you guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.